Welcome to the Savage Worlds GM Hangout. I'm your host, Jared Savage Daddy Gunning. This episode, like all episodes, brought to you by Roll20.net, the world's largest virtual tabletop. Check them out today at Roll20.net. Follow the show on Facebook at SWGM Podcast. Follow us on Twitter at SWGM Podcast. Any questions, comments, ideas, show topics, send them to savagedaddy@gmail.com. Subscribe on the YouTube channel, Savage Worlds GM Podcast, and on iTunes, Savage Worlds GM Podcast. Quasi nailed it. Tonight's topic, we have none. This is a obvious marketing ploy calling the episode Community Pool. What we're gonna do is we're gonna go through the G Plus community tonight, or any kind of community, Facebook, wherever discussions of Savage Worlds are happening, and sort of cherry pick some topics and talk about them. If you're watching the live broadcast streaming on YouTube, and you want to comment, you want to suggest a show topic, bring up an idea, something you want to talk about, feel free. We'll include it. Here to discuss it with us tonight, the triumphant return of Chris, the Savage Mommy Fox.
Did y'all miss me?
We got Dave, the Rules Maven Scott.
Go, go, go.
And some call him Jib.
On Tuesdays.
Anybody want to jump in with anyone in particular that they've noticed on the G Plus community we want to talk about? Do we want to have that discussion, Dave? Do we want to hit that one again? It's got 24 comments. Just saying.
I mean, my only problem with discussing this yet again is that there's no one on the show that's going to disagree or is going to back up the comment that's constantly being argued here. And for those of you who aren't in the know, there's a conversation that was started by a new fan of the show, Fuzzy Goblin, on the G Plus community, where he asks a question basically about, and I'll just pull it up so that I can get it right rather than
the debate about notice rolls and letting players know what the outcome, what they're rolling against, and how it affects immersion.
The idea was he was watching the old immersion show, and he disagreed with the hosts that you couldn't say, give me a notice roll to notice X. That you had to just say, give me a notice roll, and not inform the player, or you were giving away the dramatic tension. You were breaking immersion and breaking the game. The biggest proponent of this in that particular thread is Tim Kilgore, and he brings up the idea that the players aren't supposed to know any of that. They're not supposed to know that it's a dramatic task. They're not supposed to know that there's a notice roll for the panther that's stalking them, because they're not supposed to know about the panther. They're not supposed to, the mechanics aren't supposed to be seen. And the problem with that is, of course, that it kind of goes against one of the design philosophies of Savage Worlds, which is players know not only the mechanic they're dealing with, but also kind of the probable result of a success or a failure, so they know when to spend the Benny for I succeeded, but I need the raise, or oh no, I failed and I don't want to be ambushed. Here's what Benny and
go. It breaks a fundamental precept long before it ever gets to that, Dave. You're playing a fucking game.
No, I'm playing. This is real shit, man. This immersion, brother. Immersion. Hey, pass that over here. Well, and here's the thing too. I mean, however you want to chase that dragon, and we talked about this in frank detail, gross detail. Savage Worlds has a metagame component.
All games.
And well, yeah, all games do, but you have to really embrace the metagame component with Savage Worlds, because there's this thing called a fucking Benny. And I need to know, as the player character, what's the weight of this roll I'm making, so I can decide whether or not, as a player in the game, because I have agency, so I get to decide whether or not I get to be informed about whether or not I need to get to spend a Benny to re-roll this notice roll.
Well, I mean,
the precept that you're going to make the rules disappear and be, hidden behind the fog of immersion is unrealistic at best, impossible in reality. Because, one, you're playing a game. 2, you're sitting at a table with a bunch of people with potato chips on a table and a Mountain Dew in front of you.
Well, here's okay. Let's touch this for just a second. And I don't want to spend a whole lot of time talking about this because, well, God, dead horse. We all have very bloody sticks.
A whole episode's on this. So,
but if you're as a GM new to Savage World and can't accept, I can't accept it's okay to go. Give me a notice roll to see if you notice the gang of street thugs following your car for the last 3 blocks. As a GM, and I say that to you, as a GM, if you can't form those words and your heart and soul won't let you do it, then why are you letting them roll for combat? Why are you rolling dice for combat damage? Why don't you just go ahead and decide? Aren't you destroying the game and the immersion by breaking out dice and making rolls for combat?
No.
Or spell casting or any other part of the game?
It's part of the whole thing.
Right, but you accept that there are roles for combat. You accept that there are mechanics, right?
I think this goes a little deeper than that. And it's when the hobby first started, like the first games, players didn't make any dice rolls. There was one set of dice controlled by the GM, and the GM made all the dice rolls. You narrated what your character did, and the GM made dice rolls and narrated back what actually happened. That was the way the game was designed to be played when it first came out decades ago. And slowly over time, more and more things became, well, the player gets to roll this or the player gets to roll that. We even have entire player-facing systems where the GM never touches the dice now. The problem is that there's GMs who've been playing during most of that and don't want to let go of these old habits. The storytelling style of, I don't tell them what's hiding in the bushes until it's already happened because I'm going to ruin the story. Well, that's because you've got this really well-toned muscle for telling a story that way. Now you have to tone the muscles for telling a story the way Savage Worlds is meant to be played, where you have to give them that information up front. And not only do you need to be different in the way you present that story so that that's still interesting, but your players have to flex a different muscle as well so that they can follow along with what's happening and be immersed in the style that Savage Worlds allows.
You know what? Dinosaurs are extinct too.
Adapt and overcome, or you get left in the past.
Yeah.
Well, and here's my final piece of advice. Don't profess your love for Savage Worlds and talk about changing it to make it like D&D. That's just what I'm saying. Savage Worlds makes a horrible D&D.
I would say that about any game, Jared. Yep. Don't profess your love of game X and then try to turn it into game Y.
Yeah, if you want it to be game Y, then go and
play game Y.
Play game Y, which is fine.
Yeah,
I mean, if you like game Y, there's nothing wrong with you wanting to play that. Now, hopefully you're a person who likes, game, A through Z. You might like a lot of different games, but take the game for what it is. Don't try to make it something it isn't, because you're going to be unhappy. You're not going to like it, and just go to the game that you love, play that game, and then come to the other game that you want to play, whatever game that is, and enjoy that game for what it is.
Yeah, if you try to play Savage Worlds to be something else, it's inherently going to fail. And it doesn't matter how much you house rule, it doesn't matter what you do to tweak it, it's inherently going to fail because at the end of the day, it's not that thing.
Exactly.
You can't use Savage Worlds to play solitaire. Yes, there's a deck of cards on the table, but it's just not the way the game works.
Well, I'm going to say this too, and I've heard this about, and this isn't just an issue in Savage Worlds. This issue exists in other game systems too. How do you surprise the players? How do you, do this immersion thing? It's the holy grail of role playing for a lot of GMs. Like, oh, I want to see the stunned look on my players' faces for their characters being completely and utterly caught off guard and surprised and kissing my ass and telling me, oh my God, dude, that was fucking awesome. Okay. This whole thing of have everybody make 10 notice rolls and write them down and then cross them off. Why? That's not going to help you get the job done.
And again, I think that's just clinging to the old way of doing things. But to roll that into a different topic so we don't just beat this horse for an hour, there was another discussion about a month ago that came out right around the time that Jamie's post about the bennies was going on. So it kind of got crushed to the side as everybody jumped on the bandwagon to talk about the idea of Savage Worlds without bennies. It was this idea of skills and there not being enough weight on non-combat skills in the game. That, you know, this idea that fighting was something that every character buys, but knowledge religion isn't going to be bought that often, and so it should be cheaper. That you should get like knowledge skills at like a 3-to-1 rate, or you know that you should get non-combat skills at a 3-to-1 rate. All of them, you know, persuasion, streetwise, all of that. And quite frankly, my reaction when I saw that posited on the I think it was on Facebook was, no, you're doing it wrong.
What a pain in the ass. So I have to sit here and put a weight to all of the skills? No, some characters are going to have knowledge religion, some characters aren't. If your character needs to have knowledge religion, then give your character knowledge religion. There you go.
I think the fallacy in the logic, the weak point in the chain in that is Savage Worlds is 100% about combat.
Yeah.
And combat, a fighting role is far more effective in resolving shit than a persuasion role. Well, I've got news for you, boys and girls. The persuasion role is just as impactful in the game as a fighting role. You could end a conflict with talking and a roll in Savage Worlds.
If as a player you feel like those skills aren't useful, it's because your GM's not calling for those enough. And if as a GM you feel like your players never take those skills, it's because you're not calling for those roles enough.
Yeah, maybe you're focusing too much on combat. That could very well be.
Right, and a knowledge religion roll could let you know what the secret is to destroying the demon and sending it back to hell.
Well, and I was going to say...
Right, and you can make that in the middle of combat.
The aspect of this that I think gets overlooked the most is this idea that everything's a nail, therefore everything that the players bring to the table are hammers. Is GMs aren't running storylines that can't be resolved through conflict. Look at Call of Cthulhu. The Savage Worlds version of it is almost out of print at this point because people aren't playing that version of Savage Worlds where there's really not an option to go into combat. Even in Jared's zombie game, which was very heavily non-combat centered, he had one group that just kept trying to go, Savage Worlds combat on every problem he put in front of them, to the point that they had what I think it was a combined total of 7 deaths apiece over the course of the several months he ran that game.
It was up there. Yeah, it was up there.
There's this aspect within the hobby that everyone only uses combat to resolve things, and that's got to be the angle you look at that, so that you can understand why it is no one's taking knowledge religion, why it is no one's taking streetwise, because we're not putting them in situations where that's important. There's also just the aspect, and this is yet another dead horse, so I don't want to get too tied to it, but that I let my characters role play, and I don't make them roll persuasion. I don't make them roll streetwise. They can just have that conversation with the GM. It's great. Let them have that conversation. Then apply a bonus or a penalty based on the conversation to the roll, and let the roll still mechanically decide what happens. Otherwise, you're robbing the usefulness of those skills from them.
Yeah, I think that's worse than, I think that can be worse than, not calling for them enough is when they have them and they've spent the points on them to not let them use them.
Right. And I've said this before. You want to take a typical Savage Worlds adventuring party, put them in any setting, and start calling for climbing and swimming rolls and see how many people are making unskilled checks.
In my pirate game that I ran not long ago, when we were resetting some things, I had an entire group, an entire party right up characters. One player took swimming. They're pirates. They live on a boat.
Right. You don't understand, Dave. They live on the boat, not in the water, on the boat.
Well, yeah, but
nothing bad could happen on the boat that could put them into the water.
Chris, only 2 of them had boating.
Okay, I don't think your players embrace the pirate game very well.
Well, hey, okay, listen. You only have a finite number of skill points when you start character creation. I need to jam pack that shit into fighting and notice. That's how you play Savage Worlds. So that's what we're saying with the GM idea. Like, well, this fighting should be weighed much more heavily. You can do tricks. You can do smart tricks and agility tricks and all these other things. If that's the perception, I don't want to tell you you're playing the game wrong, but you're not using all the rules. I'll just put it that way. You're not using all the rules, and all the rules are there for a reason because they work and they balance everything out. It's the same. I think that comes from the same place as. What do you mean? I only need a 4 to hit something with a ranged weapon? Oh no. This is wildly unbalanced and broken. I got to overcome your parry and melee to hit you, but I can hit you at 3 feet away by just rolling a 4. Oh no, I got to change this shit. This isn't right. I got to redo the whole ranged thing because ranged attacks and magic are way unbalanced, right, Jib?
Oh, totally.
Yeah, got to fix that before we can play this game.
Because magic trumps ranged combat, trumps melee combat.
Well, to roll on that topic, there is a question that was posed in the G Plus community today regarding using powers in melee that Clint actually weighed in on and corrected several people in that if you use a power against someone who you are engaged in melee against, it is against their parry. It is considered the same as a shooting roll at that point, regardless of the trapping. And the trapping can actually result in you being unable to use the power at all. If the trapping requires a long implement like a rod or a staff, it's just like a rifle. It can't be used on a target which you're engaged with in melee to activate the power, and you can't cast that power on them.
Cool.
I'll have to go in and read that.
I had never thought about. I remember when the first post about this was in the forums. I want to say about a year ago, and I remember the idea that the way I remembered it was if you had like a wand, it was just like shooting a pistol, and that made sense to me. The idea that if you're shooting the power out of an implement like a wand or a staff, but the idea of it coming from your hands or any other way of activation that's not an implement, still having this requirement that it goes against their parry, it didn't occur to me that was what that rule actually was rooted on.
Yeah, and I think the thing with that is I don't know that I have that many magic users or players playing magic users who get that close. They try to stay out of melee, so it's always the 4 to hit. Because they're always out of melee most of the time if they're using, blast, bolt, those few powers that are the ones everybody wants to take.
Well, would that be a touch attack if they use it in melee? Would you consider that a touch attack?
I guess it would depend. But so let's look at this. So I'm in melee with Dave, and I wanna shoot a bolt. I want to use bolt. So then I make my bolt, and what we're saying is that bolt goes against their parry.
Yes, because it's the same reason that the shooting roll does is that they can reach out and knock your hand aside with their parry.
So no, I don't think it'd be a touch attack because there's certain powers that are specifically a touch power. Like your armor, I believe, is a touch power. I don't know if that's true, but aren't there some that are actually touch powers?
There are several powers that have a range of touch.
Right.
Those, to me, would be more of a touch attack.
So like damage fields? Damage field you could run as a touch attack, right?
Right.
I think when it comes to contact with it?
Damage field is just an activation. I'm not trying to hit you with it. I'm creating a field around myself. And if you happen to be in that field, You're
Ouch.
affected by it.
I'm just gonna give you a bear hug and activate it, right?
I'd have to look at the spell. Yeah, that's a good question. I'd have to look at the spell.
But no, I mean it's interesting the way that works out. And I'm trying to remember, there was another one like that here recently where Clint had cleared it up on the hold. There was another conversation regarding hold again a month or so ago, and the idea was you could go on hold at the beginning of the turn and split another character's action. You could wait for them to walk out of cover and then shoot them, and that it didn't stop them from taking any action. It actually put their turn on pause while you then took your action. You still had to win the initiative roll. You still had to win that agility check.
Agility.
Who goes first? But that basically they had already declared they were moving. You acted, then they get to take whatever actions they have left after your turn is resolved.
That's interesting. So what was said about that?
And
I didn't see that.
Actually weighed in on the side that that's exactly the way that it's designed to work, is this idea that you really could go on hold, wait for them to be halfway through their action, and then sucker punch them, shaking them, and they do not even get a chance to recover from that shaken. Because, technically speaking, the free recovery from shakens at the start of their turn, which you have interceded yourself past. So you can wait for someone to step out of cover, shake them, and now they're standing in the open, shaken, and they can drop a penny to unshake it anytime. Other than that, they're going to take free actions.
That's interesting. I had never thought about it that way. But that could lead to some very interesting combats and very interesting situations. Yeah, I kind of like that. I'm kind of interested by that. I'll have to try to find that post and read about it a little bit more.
Note to self: don't participate in any of Chris's games as a player for the next 6 months.
Yeah, because now he has something new in his arsenal. Ha!
Well, I mean, here's the thing. You stop and think about that for a second. And as a GM, your immediate thought is, ooh, I'm going to really upset a player if I do that.
Yeah,
it feels cheap.
Yeah, it does a little bit. But it's interesting. I'll probably forget about it and never use it because I'll be thinking about 8 zillion other things that I'm trying to remember to run the game. But it's an interesting thought. Exactly. So, are we ready? Are we ready to look at something different? I have one that caught my eye. It's not really a rules question.
Throw it out there.
But this one caught my eye, and I don't know. It was just this one. Jason Carter on just the Savage Worlds forum said new wildcard edge. Jacks are wild. Jacks now count as jokers for the purpose of triggering wildcard edges. And I think basically the whole point of that is people don't think wildcard edges are worth it, or they never buy them because it's only on a joker. So I know
it's
some
only
people,
a joker for yourself. It's not even like a joker came up.
Right. And I know some people use 4 jokers. So, I mean, if you really wanted to come out more, you could buy 2 of the same decks of cards, throw the 2 extra jokers in, and then come up with a way to, you say, okay, I now have 4 jokers, but I have a black 1, black 2, red 1, red 2, in case for some unknown reason 3 come out at once, and you need to see who's going to go first. So why worry about making the jacks? I mean, you could do it that way, but why not just put in a couple extra jokers?
This is gonna be my opinion on doing a setting rule to that nature. Just slightly changing the Joker's Wild. What are you trying to accomplish? Is my question. Do you want to make combat more swingy? Do you want to give characters more frequent access to Joker's edges? Then run high adventure. There's a setting rule that better serves that. They could just run high adventure, couldn't they? With Jack, with the Joker's Wild,
do the same thing. I mean, high adventure lets you drop the Benny to
one-time use of an edge.
An edge, right? But that basically says I don't have the edge,
right?
Steady hands. So I'm going to drop a Benny, and for this round, I have steady hands. Right? For this round, I'm a martial artist. Unfortunately, it doesn't say I activate the edge. So if I drop that Benny to get one of the power
Wild
shot
card
or
edges.
whatever the wild card edges are, it would only activate if I still had a joker. So the way that's worded, High Adventure wouldn't simulate it. But you could just as easily say, drop a Benny to gain the benefit of a joker.
Yeah,
for your turn.
Right.
You know?
I think what he's saying, speaking for him, which is
he wants to make it come up more statistically.
He wants to make
often.
it come up more often, and he wants to make those more viable for people to take. And that's my thought on why he would do that. And I don't know. I don't know if I agree with the making the jacks wild, but I do kind of agree that those are very specialized. Not very many people are going to take them. They don't come up that often. But I think there's only 4 of them in the game.
Required to. They're designed to be taken late in a campaign when you don't have a lot else to spend in advance on, too, though.
And aren't there only like 4 of them in the game?
Yeah.
4 or 5.
I mean, there's not a huge number of them.
But I think the flip side to that is, if I was to go that route, I would make sure they didn't get any of the other benefits of the Joker just to protect that. Yes, this might, Jax might activate that wild card edge for them, but they don't get the +2. They don't get to act whenever they want in the round.
They just get the benefit of the edge only.
They just get the benefit of the edge. I think that's the way I would go with that. Now, Jared and I created a setting rule for Savage Saturday Nights a while back, which was you got a +2 to all of your actions if you ever got a deuce. Because you were acting last in the turn order, you kind of got that benefit of reacting to everyone who interrupted you and went first. Now you can see where everybody is, and you get kind of an advantage for going last. It's that slow and steady wins the race turtle approach.
Yep.
Takes a little of the sting out of it. But again, where we did that, we called it Deuces Wild, just like Joker's Wild, but we didn't give it all the benefits of a Joker. We gave it a single specific benefit because of what we were trying to achieve. This idea that if you acted last in the round, not of your choice, that you could take that all in and act accordingly.
Right. And the other thing, too, with the Joker's Wild, I prefer not to tinker with it too much because it's a great... It's good the way it is. It's perfect the way it is. And I say that about so few setting rules in Savage Worlds. I would say they're perfect the way it is. The reason I say it's perfect the way it is because drawing a Joker is supposed to be this incredible thing that happens very infrequently. And when you have a setting rule that gives everybody the benefit of the Joker, or you're kind of taking it away from the guy that got the Joker. I like the Joker's Wild because it doesn't just give the benefit of Joker to everybody, but everybody gets to sort of get a Benny and get a win because somebody on their team drew a Joker.
Yeah, it gives you a celebratory moment as a group, but it doesn't take away the really big star of the table who just drew the act anytime you want and have all these special benefits card.
Yeah, if anything, I agree with Chris. I've been known on occasion on Roll20, if I'm playing a very swingy, high action pulpy thing, to have 6 Jokers in the deck. Just so it happens more often than not, but to where it's not over the top frequent. Yeah. There's
nothing that says you can't stack the deck with extra Jokers and just kind of let that happen. And I mean, the fun part about the Joker is, as soon as it comes out, you're refeeding it in, reshuffling that deck, and they always have that equal chance as if no Joker had ever been drawn to get a Joker to come up. So when you start stacking that deck with extra Jokers, you're just increasing that chance. So
yeah, the simpler solution, instead of writing Jax into Joker's Wild, is just stack the deck. That way you don't have to write anything down, and nobody's going to go, oh, dude, you cheated. You put in 3 extra. Wait a minute. Hold on a second. We all drew Jokers. There's 4 Jokers. You're cheating. I will never hear players say that at the table in Savage Worlds if they see 4 Jokers.
No, and you just tell them up front.
They say that when you draw a Joker 3 times in a row.
Right.
Well, and I think that's the other aspect of this is that if you make it so that all the Jacks are basically Jokers in your deck, then 1, like we've talked about, obviously you've taken away from the Joker, but 2 is the aspect that there's going to be the player who forgets that, who plays in 2 or 3 other games their turn comes up, they take their turn, they don't take the +2 bonus, they don't act whenever they want, they act when a jack would act in the turn order, and then they're going to remember after their turn and feel cheated. If you stack the deck, they will always remember what the Joker does.
Agreed.
Which is why you can't get players to stop asking for bennies whenever a Joker comes out in any game, because so many people run that as if it was the set rule instead of a setting rule.
Yep. So do we want to tackle Ruben's question about the rogue? I mean, he did go to all the trouble typing it, so let's go ahead and just jump on that real quick.
Sure. And then I found something else that I found interesting.
Okay, I'll read this one from Ruben. So Ruben Riviera writes, heard this one asked by my players, hence my curiosity. Making a rogue close to the style of a D&D one, if everyone is bored. Well, I'm not bored, but we'll talk about it.
I'm not bored. But my first question is, what do you mean by a D&D rogue?
There you go. So you build a Savage Worlds rogue and give them the thief edge. There you go.
I mean, well, it's somebody who's a thief, and if so, again, what kind? Are we talking cat burglar? Are we talking confidence man? Are we talking pickpocket? Are we talking safecracker? What are we talking?
Yes. All the above. And here's the good thing: Savage Worlds, I could build it, right? All the above.
Well, yeah.
Well, I think
he's not gonna be great at any of them, but he'll,
Well, I think honestly he'll be better than a D&D rogue would.
Probably.
I mean, let's stop and look at this for a second. If you spend basically more than 2 points buying this rogue fighting, you are already more powerful than most D&D rogues are through more than half the campaign. That therein lies the rub, is that Savage Worlds has a completely different progression arc from D&D.
Right.
So if you buy higher than a D6 in anything, you are way more powerful as a novice rogue in Savage Worlds than you would be that jack of all trades rogue in D&D, just simply because the modifier stack is way different.
I'll say this about building. Basically, you're just going to take if you want to build like a classic high agility backstabbing rogue, then Savage Worlds, you just basically qualify for the thief edge, and you're there.
Assassin.
Yeah, take stealth as a skill.
Assassin.
Yeah,
thief and assassin, and you're there.
Yeah. Assassin, where you get the bonus to the damage every time you get the drop, and I mean that's already pretty nasty in Savage Worlds. So
yeah, if you want to if you want to throw in a little bit of armor in the game, take the strong-willed edge, so you're not as easily intimidated or taunted by your friends, and then put some levels in persuasion so you can talk your way out of shit.
Yeah, there you go.
Streetwise to find out, to put your fingers on the pulse. But you're not gonna. Here's the thing: you can still be a fighty character as a rogue in Savage Worlds. You can have a wizard who has the thief edge. I mean, I can do the whole warrior mage thing as just a regular character build. I don't
regular character build. You can wear armor, doesn't hurt you. It's awesome.
Well, I mean, one of the interesting aspects is if you go back and reread the original Conan stuff from Howard, Conan describes himself as a rogue. Mm-hmm. And all of his adventures are roguish adventures. He's hiding, he's slipping into places, he's breaking things open. Yes, he's using brute strength and barbarian mannerisms to do those things, but freaking that's a rogue with a two-handed sword, guys.
Yep.
Can't really do that in D&D.
If you want to find, and here's the other thing too, just I'll throw this out to Ruben's players. There's a section in character creation called archetypes, and lo and behold, there's actually an archetype there labeled, I don't know, rogue.
Wait, what?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. It's called read the fucking manual. The answer to your question is you need to read the book. The answer to their question is you need to read the book because it's right there. It's laid out for you with an entire stat block, and the only thing you make it choose decisions on are the hindrances that you're going to add. It's already laid out for you. You want to play a priest? Want to play a cleric? Go ahead. It's called Priest Healer.
Yeah,
You want to play a pirate?
Your classic pirate characters are all listed in the archetypes. It's
Yeah, they're there. And also go to the Fantasy Companion if you want more.
Yeah, and exactly like we said, the edges that the rogue archetype lists for you to take as a novice character, assassin and thief. Done.
Seems like Savage Worlds knows what it's doing.
Who'd have thunk it?
Amazing.
So this question I saw from Mark G. I'm not even going to attempt to say the last name. I mean, it's been answered, but just in case people didn't read it. And it's the number 2 question. Wounds and fatigue. One player has 3 wounds and a fatigue level from a rat bite. A, is this even possible to have 3 wounds and 1 fatigue? B, fatigue does not affect pace, correct? I have found nothing in the fatigue section that mentions pace and fatigue, which is strange to me. Yeah, it's possible to have 3 wounds and fatigue. You take a second fatigue, you've got 3 wounds. Yeah, you've got 3 wounds and 2 fatigue if you take a second fatigue. Now you take 1 more wound or 1 more fatigue. Guess what? Incapacitation.
And it sucks because at that point, you're rolling everything at -5.
Right. Yeah, you're fucked at that point. But it sure is possible. And I do not believe that it mentions anywhere that fatigue lowers your pace.
It doesn't.
No.
I see you make the point where it should.
Why?
Because you're fatigued, you're slowing down.
Okay,
I guess
wounds should affect your pace.
Well, yeah, I know wounds affect your pace, but let's say you have no wounds and 2 fatigue. But I guess fatigue is also bumps and bruises. So yeah. So no, I guess it's not really necessary.
Yeah, I mean, the aspect of it is, I mean, fatigue could be anything from mental strain and stress where you're not thinking, but it doesn't slow you down, to actually being so freaking tired you can't put 1 foot in front of the other. But I think once you get to the point where you're so tired you can't put 1 foot in front of the other, we call that exhausted. That's from having a 3rd level of fatigue, and it causes incapacity.
Right. Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
Well, and there's thing to remember too. It can affect pace if the character wants to run, because running is an action in Savage Worlds. And even if they make that running die, they're going to apply the wound modifiers to it. So if I have a D6 running die and I've got 3 wounds and 2 levels of fatigue, I'm probably not going more than another 6 feet in my movement.
Right, because you're like, oh shit, so tired, can't run.
Yeah, even if I roll a 6, best case scenario, I roll a 6 on a D6 red die. Oh, hey, I get to move 1 extra inch.
Which is fitting with 3 wounds and 2 fatigue, because that's how it should be.
Right. Now, I'd like to throw one out here just as a real quick reminder, because we're talking about fatigue and we're talking about wounds. Falling down a staircase is not falling damage. Tumbling down a hill is not falling damage. So if you're falling down a staircase, somebody pushes you down a staircase, don't apply the falling damage rules, because that's the same thing as stepping off a precipice and plummeting straight down, or being pushed off the top of a 3-story building where you're just going, gravity just holds you, makes you its bitch, and slams you down to the pavement. You'll notice when it talks about fatigue and bumps and bruises, especially in Savage Worlds, it gives out this concept that not everything has to result in a wound. So if your player character is navigating a steep embankment, rocky cliff embankment face, and they're under stress, they're being chased by goblin hordes on wargs, have them make agility rolls to avoid tripping and falling. If they trip and fall, they just take a level of fatigue. Level of fatigue is bumps and bruises, and that resolves 24 hours later, or after it's taken. They don't need to have a wound. Now, the great thing is the fatigue is easier to recover in game terms than a wound, but it still has the same net effect of a -1 to their actions.
Well, and I mean, the interesting aside to that is that fatigue is also, to a certain extent, easier to cause to a target in Savage Worlds than a wound is. Therefore, a really smart opponent will just fatigue you. And you will drop over from fatigue long before they probably could have killed you.
faster. Hey, Dave, can you soak levels of fatigue? No, I don't think so.
No, there's no way to do that. The only way to get rid of fatigue before the 24 hours is that Sukar or whatever it's called.
Sucre, yeah, Sucre could work.
Sucre Jolt.
Mm-hmm.
Mind you, they have to hit you with a power that has that effect.
I call this one the defibrillator. Boom.
I mean, to be fair,
I'll defend.
Yeah, I just wanted to throw that in real quick. But talk about bumps and bruises because I think it's overlooked even by advanced game masters when it comes to Savage Worlds. People have been playing and running games for a long time. You don't necessarily need to do falling damage to cause a wound. You can just say, give me a agility roll to avoid a level of fatigue from bumps and bruises.
Well, I mean, that's the interesting thing with Savage Worlds is there's so many things like that even if you've been playing for decade now, there's going to be things that you're going to have never had come up at your table, so you've forgotten it from the way it's written in the book, or you didn't read the example clearly, or there's not an example in the book, so you didn't know. One that I was hit with not long ago, and this was I actually got the nice pimp slap from Clint himself on this one, is Born a Hero. Born a Hero says that you can take any edge regardless of rank requirements. Well, apparently that extends to the point where you can take any power with the new power edge regardless of the rank requirements. So a novice character can take Puppet as a new power because of Born a Hero. It is nuts.
Scary.
It's insane. But once Clint laid it out there and you look at it, I can see the idea behind it. I can definitely understand the idea of a character starting with kind of this really big thing that they can do, but they can do it once.
Right.
Because they're at novice rank, they're going to have no power points to fuel it.
It's their one. That's called shooting your wad. Shoot all those power points in one spell and better hope that it works how you want.
So let's
Don't miss that roll.
let's talk preferences real quick. This was one of the topics came up on the Savage Worlds Game Master community over at G+. If you guys want to go over there, anybody listening who's not a member of the Savage Worlds G+ community for Game Masters, Savage Worlds Game Masters on G+, feel free to go ahead. I will give you a secret into getting approved for membership. Don't give me a blue head. Do not request a membership with a blue head because if you can't be bothered with coming up with a profile pic, well, sorry.
Let's be a picture of yourself.
Right. I need some effort to approve that. But that being said, this came up. What is the panel's thought on PowerPoints, pros and cons? I'll start with this. It's almost easier, I think, in a way, to run a no PowerPoints campaign. Use the no PowerPoints setting rule. For those of you, since we're talking about it, with no PowerPoints setting rule, instead of having PowerPoints and tracking how they refresh and tracking how they're spent, it takes away that bookkeeping resource by making you have half the number of PowerPoints rounded down to a minimum of -1 on a dice roll. So if it requires 6 PowerPoints, that's a -3 to the arcane skill roll. If it's 1 PowerPoint, it's still a -1 to the arcane skill roll. I don't mind it. I think it's easier for players to actually get used to. I'm not sure it's a great idea because you don't have any refresh rate. It makes Magic just this unending resource, this gun that never empties. And if that's what you're looking for, if you're looking for that style of Magic in your game, where it's endless ammo for Magic, go ahead. It's going to make things a little more difficult, but go ahead.
I was going to say, you mentioned endless ammo.
As written.
Well, PowerPoints is a setting rule, Jib. I mean, you can apply it as rules as written. It's a setting rule.
I get that. I'm not saying it's not. I'm just saying I like the core rules.
And why? What about the core rules that make you prefer that over no PowerPoints?
Because it makes Magic more of a will thing rather than forget thing. And it makes it makes it something you have to keep track of and think about if you're going to be a caster.
I don't disagree. I don't disagree at all.
Yeah, I can see that.
I think for me, it depends on the game world I'm trying to capture. I have one that's a kind of I've called it Beyond the Silver Veil, and the idea is that magic and fairy and all that stuff have come to the real world. So you've got people running around with standard, real world stuff, guns and cars and all of that. Then you've got the guy who's an orc who just shows up. And in that world, it's very much you're tracking power points just like the guy with the gun is tracking ammunition, because it's this visceral thing that magic is so out of place. So it's got a limit. It's got this range that it's able to achieve, and then after that, he's got to go rest in a corner for a little while before he can do that again. By the flip side, though, if I'm running a high fantasy game, I'm just as likely to give out wands to all of the mage characters and say, this is an unlimited ammo bolt spell. Take other powers than bolt, but this is your bolt power in an unlimited ammo. And then I run the endless ammo setting rule for everybody who's using bows, crossbows, etc. So that, yes, you have to follow the idea of fire so many times and then take a reload action, but you never run out. And the idea is that, again, you're wanting to capture this. The mage can shoot a spell every round, but they still have that other group of things they can do that are a little more utility-based, a little more powerful, that has a limiter on them.
So, Jim, just a point of a question to add on to your feeling about Magic being a limited resource that needs to be considered and refreshed.
Huh?
Excuse me 1 second. Do we have do you apply the same level of tracking to ammo for your players who are using weapons? Or you just sort of let it slide?
Is it dramatic? Is it dramatically relevant?
Okay. That's fair enough.
Now, I will say this, and I have also had games where I've had potions or food help replenish that, and it cuts down the rest period required, or it speeds up that refresh process by having something you can drink really quick, or you can eat this, and you're going to double the rate at which you get them back, or something, because it draws on this idea that the power user is draining their facilities, and they have to do something to recoup it, and that's why. So again, I think a lot of that, at least for me, comes down to setting.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that, and I don't have a problem with the variant rules that you were talking about, Jared. It would depend on what I was trying to do with the game.
Situational. Right.
Yeah, well, I'm not saying anybody's doing it wrong. I'm just asking, asking questions.
No, it's just yeah, no.
Yeah, it depends, and I agree with Dave. It really depends on the flavor of your settings. So,
yep.
There's some settings that don't let you take Soul Drain because you can basically steal power points by sucking them out of another character. If that doesn't fit in your idea, your gravitas, your idea of the world, then by all means don't throw it in. I think that I was just saying that I think that the no PowerPoint setting rule, though, is a little quicker and faster at the table. It does lose something in the fact that they can just keep firing them like they don't have, like it's, Magic is free all day long.
Yeah, no limit. There's not a limiter on it, and that can cause problems.
Especially when you get up to higher levels and you get things like Puppet and all.
Right.
I need to do what? Yeah.
Well, and I guess my thing would be the couple things that you brought up with the limiter, and that if you're going to do that, then I would say, in my opinion, what we already talked about is that I would also maybe not make other people count ammo, because if you're going to make them count ammo and you're not going to make a wizard count power points, you're giving that wizard a benefit, in my mind, that you may not necessarily be giving the rest of the players.
Yeah, if I can cast Bolt forever and it
All day
costs
long.
nothing, but the guy with the machine gun's going to run out of ammo halfway through the combat, then I absolutely am at an advantage over him because I took that arcane background that's not designed to be part of that.
Right. Well, and I guess also, though, if you look at it, looking at the rule, there is some backlash. So I guess if you're using it too much, you have maybe more of an opportunity to have that backlash. And it's a 1 on the arcane roll. It doesn't matter what you roll on the wild die. If you roll a 1 on your arcane die, you're taking 2d6 damage.
And I will also add, I have also played where critical failure means you can't re-roll that. Even if you had a success on the wild die, I will say you can't re-roll 1s on a skill die for things like the firing into melee, the innocent bystander rule, or backlash rules, because again, if we're going to run this idea that a failure is a failure, then yeah, a mishap on that 1 is a mishap on that 1 regardless. So that's another interesting little thing where I've added to a setting rule a little bit to capture something that, quite honestly, I mean, when was the last time you had a backlash at your table?
Yeah, it's been a while.
It happened fairly often in both the Deadlands game and in the fantasy game that I ran.
Right, but you have players that embrace failure, right?
I was going to say,
it as being interesting.
I always qualify that question with Jib's players, because Jib's players are the type who are masochistic enough they want to see the bad thing that's coming to
right.
the hands
Jib's,
of Jib.
Jib's players go, okay, hold on, wait a second. So I rolled a 1 on the trait die. What bad thing happens if I roll a 1 on the trait die? Oh, well, your weird size device, it blows up, and everybody around you suffers 2d6 damage. Ooh, interesting.
Yeah!
Ooh, interesting. Yeah, let's see what happens when that happens.
Okay,
you gonna re-roll it? Oh, fuck no.
One of my characters in the Deadlands game, who shall remain nameless, Gina, had a character who was a witch who had the curious and naive hindrances.
It's a nice combo.
And she was like, so they're in the middle of a fight, right? And these they're trying to sneak up on some bad guys, and she just like walks right up, going, "Hey, what are you guys doing over there?" Alrighty then.
Yeah, just players like to do the dance with death. Let's see what happens when I fall off the cliff, just because it'll be interesting. Yeah. They're not worried about winning an RP, winning a role-playing game.
Right.
So here's one that came up that kind of, at least in my opinion, dovetails into this a little bit, because we've been talking so much about ammo as the reverse of the no PowerPoints is, hey, what do you do about ammo? It made me think of, there's been some questions lately about an expanded guns list that captures the difference between individual, manufacturers, like a Sig Sauer versus a Glock versus, a Beretta, etc. And I've seen a lot of pushback from the community that's a trappings issue, which I think leans very heavily towards like what we see in the Sci-Fi Companion, where it's, here's your light pistol, your medium pistol, your heavy pistol, and they all do either 2d6 minus 1, 2d6, or 2d6 plus 1. That seems to be kind of the prevailing wind right now in the community, but I've had conversations in the past where people are like, no, it's absolutely different, that we have to have a Beretta that's different from a Glock, that's different from a 1911, that these are very different weapons designed for different things. And unfortunately, I just don't think Savage Worlds' combat system is able to take that on. Because while it's true, weapons are designed to overcome certain things. Each weapon that's been designed was supposed to be better than another weapon that couldn't do X, whether it was penetrate armor or whatever. There's always been the kind of this arms race that goes on with that naturally. But Savage Worlds abstracts combat so much. I just don't think there's room for that.
Right. I think you want that ease of play. I think having too many things broken out like that for me would just slow things down and make things annoying.
Well, I'm going to go out on a limb here. And I'm one of the first guys to say, take a look at the equipment list, and anything that has identical stats, draw a marker through it and see what you're left with as a point to this is all being trappings. I will say this, if that is your groove, if for the GM and the players, not just the GM, but if that's a thing for the GM and the players and that's your groove, and you're playing something where that fits in the world and you want a level of verisimilitude, then rock out with your cock out. Go for it. But I would say if you're going to do that, then impose the skill specialization rule as a caveat to doing it as well. To where the skill specialization rule, if I'm going to take, automatic pistols, or I'm going to take semi-automatic, I'm going to take rifle, or I'm going to take full auto, I'm going to have a distinction and training that lets me know as a character what the difference is in these different guns that I'm taking, then I think that's a fair trade-off in Savage Worlds. Even that said, I would not go too far down that rabbit hole.
Right. No.
The Savage World Star Wars that I did not long ago had a version of this where I added in the different weapon types that existed in Star Wars. You had like the blaster versus the sonic weapon versus like the actual laser or repeater, and each one had an effect it had similar to having trappings and effects from powers that are just automatic. Like if you were shot with a blaster, it cauterized the wound because it was a high yield plasma bolt that hit you. If you were hit with a repeater, it was an actual physical object that hit you, so it had a lower armor penetration than what the energy weapons did, and things like that. Like I actually went through and kind of tailored that, and I had some species were even like more resilient against certain weapon types in that regard. The problem is that when I went through all of that, and I was very deep into looking into the Star Wars wiki and stuff to get there, it was so much work that the players never even looked at. The players I had were Star Wars geeks through and through, and they didn't take the time to look into what was the difference between the different weapons.
Right. And that's why I say if it's important to you and your players and it fits in your world, in your setting world, then go for it. I mean, if you're good, I can see something like that having some value in an Old West game. Where black powder, where you still have to, stop instead of reloading, you're actually, putting in shot and everything else to make a difference, than having a gun that doesn't need to do that. Revolutionary and a huge difference. If it's reloading a speed loader for a 6-shot revolver and spinning it, then absolutely that gun has distinct advantages over the other. But in a modern setting where all guns are basically a magazine, you just pop it out and pop a new one in, and they can, semi-auto. I mean, do you really need that level of detail? Probably not. And in that case, it becomes a trapping. I don't care what your gun. It can be, an extended barrel. It could be RoboCop's blaster. It could be the blaster from the 2 double trigger pistol from Blade Runner. I don't give two fucking shits. They both do 2d6 damage and have a 12, 24, 48. What they look like is trappings. It doesn't.
Right. That's all up to you as a player.
Yeah. If you want to talk about how cool your gun is, go ahead. Describe in great detail how cool your gun is. When we go to roll dice, it's the same thing as the Glock.
As everybody else's gun at the table, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh look, it's a gun. It does 2d8 damage. Yay, carry on.
If you wanted to create it as a weird science device, if you want it to be something super special, that you had some guy tweak for you and invent for you, and it's got 20 power points and it refreshes takes the same amount of time to refresh the load to shoot the weapon. Let them buy it for the same cost as an Edge. Let your characters buy a weird science device. Why not? Let them buy it. Go for it. It depends on your game, though. All right. So we have anything else in the community? Because we're about to wrap this bitch up.
I've not seen anything else in the comments. A lot of people commenting on stuff we had said, but nothing that's a question.
All right. Okay. Well, then, in that case, then I will just say this is Jared Savage Daddy Gunning for Chris, Dave, and Jib.
Yo.
Keep rolling and stay savage.